continuing this week with the series of messages we were dealing with on our families. Just wanted to kind of help us understand a little bit deeper about how important it is to have a foundation. In other words, how important it is before we can ever lay a foundation, we need a blueprint to follow. If we don't have something to model ourselves after, if others don't have something to model themselves after, we get all off track. This building here you're sitting in was erected in 1958. It's the only building on this site that was actually erected from beginning to end for the purpose of what it's used for. All the other part of the building was moved in at different times throughout the period in the history of the church. And you can tell it whenever you have to do some work on the building. All you have to do is go up in the attic, don't you, Mr. James, and see the different holes that have been cut to get access to the different buildings that were brought in and tied together. But it serves its purpose. The biggest issue you run into is when you begin to work on it. You realize it didn't have a unified blueprint to have a certain purpose and plan to be used for a certain way. Your life and your family are very much that same way. If you don't have a unified purpose and plan to follow as you're trying to build a relationship with your family and your relationship with Jesus Christ, we begin to stumble and fall. I believe we have to have some type of model to follow if we're going to be who we need to be and followers of Jesus Christ. 60 Minutes a few years ago ran a special on a problem that was going on in a South African wildlife preserve. It talked about the need for parents and adults to be role models for their kids. Now here's the reason I bring this up. It seems that they were going through a period where 39 rare white rhinos had been slaughtered, killed. And they were trying to determine what the problem was and who was doing it. And so as they looked, it turned out that the rhinos were killed not by poachers or hunters, who we might think they were. Most people would do something like that. But by juvenile delinquents. Actually, they were delinquent teen elephants. What had happened was, during the period of time in which about 10 years prior to that, they began to have an escalated population of elephants. And so what the parks directors and the people who were managing it decided to do, we've got to get rid of. This reserve cannot sustain all the growth that's coming in through these elephants continually to multiply. And so they decided that they would actually go in and kill the adult elephants. And they left the ones who were old enough to take care of themselves, the younger ones, who could feed and care for themselves. The problem was that they were too immature. And so as a result, since there wasn't dominant males there, the young males began to get sexually active before they should have. And their testosterone, get it out? That's my Eastern North Carolina problem I've got. Their testosterone began to grow and multiply, and it made them not only be overly sexually active, but also it made them become very active and aggressive toward other animals. And what they would actually do would go in with some of these more violent animals, they would go in and actually kneel down or sit on or squash the life out of these rhinos. And so the Park Service decided the only thing that they could do to stop some of this was to bring in a mature adult to model for them what they should be. And so they basically brought in an alpha male. And in a period of no time at all, he began to help them settle down. Now, the ringleader, Mafado, had to be killed because he was just too, this time, rebellious. But what they did determine was it's not right to take role models, regardless if it's in the animal kingdom or the human kingdom, out of the way. Because we have no blueprint. We have nothing to follow along the way. And so thinking along those lines this morning, I want us to look in Proverbs chapter 20, verse 7 briefly. We learn from these animals that there's a definite correlation between seeing who we are as human beings in our culture as role models. It's no different than what they were experiencing there. Children who don't have a proper role model will do most anything, won't they? They just run amok. And it's not because they just choose to, they just don't sometimes know any better. We don't seem to know how to discipline and love them in the right way to help them understand that maybe the things that they're doing are not helping them grow into the adults that they need to be. Proverbs 20, verse 7, the New Revised Standard says, "The righteous walk in integrity, and happy are the children who follow them." Isn't that amazing? Happy are the children who follow them. Just a few things I want us to model this morning, not only for our own children, but for young people as a whole. If we're going to be role models, mentors, parents, whatever the case, grandparents, I think if we're going to be that type of person, I need to be able to model, first of all, maturity. You know? It's one thing to be my child's friend or a good friend of somebody and be able to play games and have a good time. But there's another time where we just have to be the mature adult and make decisions for the people around us. And they need to see it's consistent in our life that we live a mature life, especially when it comes to our Christian faith. You know, I believe that we run into a problem when we don't allow our lives to model into situations in which we live in. You see, you all have your own life situation. But when we don't allow ourselves to model in those life situations our Christian faith and our character, and we don't live up to the Christian maturity in which we have developed into, there becomes a problem. And that maturity should be evident all the way through life in every act and reaction that we make toward whatever happens in the life situations that we find ourselves in. I've said this before. I want to say it again, though. Our Christian maturity is not a declaration that we've made it. I admitted to you to begin with, before I ever started this, that in light of who I am, how could Jesus ever love me? You know? I yet to have seen to feel like I have made it, to where I've just got it all together. But I think that's the humbling process of learning how to be mature. Søren Kierkegaard said this: "There are in the end only two ways open to us: to honestly and honorably make an admission of how far we are from the Christianity of the New Testament, or to perform skillful tricks to conceal the true situation." Now let's get real. Most of the Christian people, or the ones that call themselves Christians, I believe they're modeling what Kierkegaard calls tricks. We're more immature than we are mature when it comes to living out our life and our faith in front of those people we should be modeling it for. We don't want to admit when we have our problems and our circumstances in life where we realize that we are failing. We want to automatically say, "Oh, I've got it all together." Well, you know the type. We don't want to hear the preacher say he's got problems. If anything, when he walks in on Sunday morning, his feet shouldn't even touch the floor. He glides to the pulpit. He speaks the very oracles of God when he opens his mouth. Gracious. If he would read the scriptures one more time, it would be like the drunk I was telling you about my dad encountered. If he read the scriptures one more time, there'd only be one greater than he was. And that's the way we try to do a lot of time as Christians when we're around other people. When we see their mistakes, instead of model for them how we've overcome in those areas, we begin to point our fingers. And how immature is that? Hebrews chapter 5, verse 14 says, "But solid food is for the mature, who by constant use have trained themselves to distinguish good and evil." And sometimes in our Christian lives, we don't know how to distinguish what's good and what's bad.